Good afternoon. Welcome to the Batman Show. Welcome back, Eric Woods. Yay!
Thank you.
How are you, Mr. Woods?
Getting better
Excellent.
as each day goes on, but the house is full of COVID. So, yeah.
Let's not say that word ever again on the show.
What, COVID?
Yeah, that word. Yeah.
Okay. Corona.
Okay. Beer. Yeah.
Yeah, so I don't know if I had it or not. I didn't get a test, but my wife and son have it. And my daughter right now, I think, is still immune because she had it back in April or something like that. So
Has she come home from school, or did you make her stay at school?
No. She's at school right now. And it's just like you don't have to stay home from school anymore if you have it. But thank goodness we have the tests, so at least we just know what we're going through because, my problem was bronchitis, so I'm dealing with breathing issues. So if I don't make it through this show, or I speak in not as long sentences as I usually do, it's still hard to kind of, get the air out.
Okay. Well, I'm glad you're doing better.
Yeah, thanks.
And Ian, how are you?
I'm fine. Thank you for asking. That's all I have to say on the matter.
Okay. Cool. Well, before we start discussing like really great film music, what's y'all's opinions on Black Adam?
What's that? Never heard of it.
It's a movie coming out. I listened to the soundtrack. I have my thoughts, but let me hear y'all's first.
I've seen the trailers for it. It looks. I mean, it's another superhero film. But at your request, I listened to the Black Adam theme from Lorne Balfe's soundtrack an hour ago, and it's quite a meaty kind of muscular main theme. But I haven't listened to the rest of it yet. So
okay.
Yeah, it sounds okay.
Sounds okay. Okay.
Yeah. What about you?
Me?
Have you listened?
Well, Eric, you said you haven't listened to it yet, right?
No, I haven't.
I don't know if I want to like sour anyone's water over this, but
sour away.
I'd probably rather be like waterboarded with like Barbara Walters pissed than listen to it again.
Wow, we went there.
Barbara Walters pissed.
Specifically Barbara Walters.
Rosie O'Donnell, Nancy Pelosi, Madonna. I mean, take your pick of, past their prime.
I want to ask a question, but I'm not going to because the wow in the chat is definitely appropriate.
I was not here. I like God, that track just like I'm getting slapped in the face like a sonic racket. I'm like, let me listen to another track. And it's like same thing. It's like every track is just like, I'm like, oh Lord, just make it stop, YouTube.
That's what I heard. I heard the main theme is fine, but then it's just an onslaught of overly aggressive noise. And yeah, I have really no interest in seeing the movie. I'm pretty much superheroed out. And the score, usually when Lorne Balfe's name comes up, I'm like, whatever. I mean, he's written some outstanding material in the past few years. I mean, his Dark Materials is maybe the best thing he's done. And Black Widow, there were some definite highlights in that as well. But he's just so bland isn't the word, and I don't want to insult the guy because he's an extremely nice human being. I mean, he gets hounded and insulted enough on Twitter as it is, but I just am indifferent to his music, and that's kind of the way I am with a lot of new scores that I hear nowadays. Again, not saying that there isn't a lot of great new music. It's just the onslaught of overly mediocre stuff that comes out year after year is quite disappointing. And that's where I'm at with Balfe. Just he's got his fingers in everything. And it's kind of annoying. to me.
I enjoyed. He did the Batman Lego cartoon movie, right?
Yeah,
Yeah,
that was
I
fine.
like that. Yeah.
I mean, again, I'm not saying that he hasn't written anything good. He has, but it's just anytime he's announced them, like even his Mission Impossible score, I particularly didn't really like. He's just kind of like the guy that people go to get things done on time, within the budget, and make it satisfactory enough to say, all right, it's good, we can release the movie. There's nothing overly special, I think, about his compositions. Again, his Dark Materials, I think if anybody has listened to, there's 2 albums. One is the original soundtrack recording, and the other one is just like a wonderful compilation of themes. Listen to that one. It's probably the best thing he's ever written. So, but yeah, just kind of, I don't care.
I was looking forward to it, but then I listened to it. I'm like, oh Lord.
And also the length of these albums are getting ridiculous. And I think we might have talked about this before, but I'm at the point where I don't have time for like 90-minute albums anymore. And I mean, my 25-year-old self is just absolutely angry at me because back when I started collecting, I wanted everything. But now I see the value of a wonderfully curated album of highlights, of just the great stuff, because I don't really think you need everything. At least I don't need everything. It's nice to have expanded scores, and there's some that I will not ever do without. I mean, Raiders complete, Empire complete, but and even some Jerry Goldsmith complete scores are masterful. But yeah, I find that length of albums, new albums nowadays, it's just too much. It's too much for me to even go through and just try to find the highlights. So, and that's why I appreciate, I mean, we're talking about Jerry Goldsmith. Jerry Goldsmith did a great job at curating his albums. 40, 50 minutes long, and it was just one highlight after the other. Even on some of his kind of mediocre scores, they were still good listens.
But a lot of the time, he didn't write incredibly long scores.
Right.
So it was quite easy to curate those albums, I would imagine.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and I know it makes a lot of people angry, but sometimes these scores don't work in their complete form. It's nice to evaluate them that way and to listen to the progression from start to finish, that whole dramatic arc within the score. But then there's times where I really just want to listen to, give me 40 minutes of First Night with a couple of the missing themes inserted from the complete release. But,
yep.
But yeah, there's some albums that are just missing maybe 1 or 2 tracks, and then they would be perfect.
Well, Ian, any final words on Black Adam? Or
no, well, I agree with Eric when it comes to Lorne Balfe. It's just, I mean, the guy obviously knows what he's doing, but yeah, I only listened to that one track, which sounded okay to me, which is the main theme, I would imagine. But as you say, it was bombastic. If the whole of the rest of the score is like that, and it's an hour and 40 or hour and 50 minutes of that,
I think it's even louder than that.
Right. It would become a bit wearing, I think. So, yeah. Until I listen to the whole thing, I don't know. But that's all I have to say about that.
That's fine. Well, on Jerry Goldsmith.
Yay.
I hope I didn't frighten anyone off in the chat with my description. Ian Clark is in the chat. Good to see you, sir. And Anders Falk, hello, how are you? David Pimsack, how are you, my friend?
Hello, David.
Big Al presents. Bring on the score pros. Okay.
Hello, Big Al.
Whoa. No, I don't mean to block you. Oops. Okay. What am I doing here? And David thinks maybe Eric won't be making him spend too much money today if he's not feeling so well.
Probably not.
That won't stop him.
Is Planet of the Apes a horror score?
I I never classified it as a horror score. It's
Hmm.
science fiction. I never really. I mean, the thing is, do we have to define horror, or are we just going to pick a broad list of albums that might have, like if somebody gets murdered in it, does that mean it's a horror movie? So I think of like horror is like, uh, purposeful jump scares and a particular atmosphere, monsters, gothic horror, blood and guts, things that genuinely scare you. I mean, a murder mystery doesn't necessarily scare me. That's why, Silence of the Lambs is a tough one for me to classify as horror. I find it more of a dramatic thriller than anything, but there's still some pretty creepy elements in that movie that might make it horror, but we'll see. We'll see how we go along what people think. But I never classified Planet of the Apes as horror, especially the sequels. And
You
then even the
change
new
the
series was
context
never
around just a little bit, and it's a horror movie
like a planet full of apes is the horror
that,
aspect
that
of
want
it.
to kill you and you can't get off. Yeah,
Sure, but I don't think it plays out like a traditional horror movie, right? It's
True.
not like they're monsters, they're representative of what human beings are, I guess, but they just happen to be apes. The roles are reversed, but I don't necessarily think it's like the tradition of horror. But again, it's the definition of horror, I guess, is quite broad. Like Altered States is like this psychedelic thriller, but that could be a horror movie. And I'd have classified that as a horror movie. There's some genuinely creepy, scary stuff in that, but is that traditional horror? So, oh man, who do you have in your chat there?
they're gone.
Oh, wow. That was fun.
Johnny says there's lots of Goldsmith scores he wants to listen to alone at night. Well, I always listen to The Omen before I fall asleep every night. Wake up feeling rested. Is Coma horror? What year did that come out?
78, 77.
We'll
I
just
think.
pencil it in on the list and we'll discuss it when we get to that year.
I mean, they classify it on Wikipedia as a mystery thriller, dramatic mystery thriller. So, and I can't remember the last time I saw Coma. So, I don't know.
Well, let's start with the beginning. I wrote up a pretty extensive list, I think. So starting
interesting.
Sorry,
I was going to say it's an interesting list, but we'll
I was trying to cover all the bases. So.
Okay.
Starting with the Twilight Zone TV shows, he scored, looks like 4 episodes. Do we consider those to be horrific or science fiction, or can we get these anywhere on a CD?
I think it depends on what kind of episode he scored, because Twilight Zone runs the gambit of many different genres. I mean, they're all kind of weird episodes, but they're not necessarily all horror. I mean, when we get to Twilight Zone the movie, I think there's only one episode in that is, I think, truly a horror. Some of it's just
playing.
It's the 20,000 feet, the Nightmare at 20,000 feet for sure. So again, I'm not familiar with Goldsmith's Twilight Zone material. I'm pretty sure the Goldsmith Odyssey might have covered that already, and it's something that if they have, then that's probably the best place for anybody to listen to Goldsmith's music from that series. But I'm not familiar with it to make an opinion.
I think there may be. I think we maybe mentioned this last week or some other time. I've got all the original Twilight Zones on Blu-ray. The original Rod Serling from 59, 58, 59 through to 63.
Yeah, it's in around there.
So that kind of block of Twilight Zone, and a lot of the episodes on the Blu-ray have isolated score tracks.
Oh, neat.
So I know there's a few of the Bernard Herrmann ones, and I'm not sure whether Jerry Goldsmith gets isolated score tracks for his episodes, but almost every episode has an isolated score track, so
Wow.
it probably does. So
Another show I didn't even know existed, Boris Karloff's Thriller. He did 18 episodes.
Yeah. Now that's something I am familiar with, and they're wonderfully re-recorded by the City of Prague Philharmonic. There's 2 volumes of music from that series. They're just lovingly newly recorded. They sound like film scores that could be written today. Yeah, there's nothing dated about the music at all, and it's not like overly aggressive horror. It's really smart, introspective horror material. Lots of atmosphere, but it's all in that distinct Goldsmith voice. And so if you like Goldsmith's sound and you kind of want to hear him go down that road of horror, but not like that, overly gothic horror that comes from The Omen, maybe this is more in the lines of like Seconds and Mephisto Waltz, then you got to get those 2 CDs. They're so well done and they sound amazing, just amazing. So yeah, Tadlow again, just knocking it out of the park with those re-recordings.
Well, you have sold me that CD. Thank you.
There's 2.
And I think these are still widely available everywhere,
Yeah.
and at fairly decent prices as well.
Great booklets too. I mean, I knew nothing about the series, but there's so much detailed information. And I think did Lee Phillips, I can't recall, did he do a lot of the reconstruction on that score?
I think so. Let's have a look. Well, it's produced by James Fitzpatrick and Lee Phillips. So,
Okay.
Yeah.
I think Lee Phillips is going to be the guy that's going to take over from James Fitzpatrick. I think he's the one, honestly, with his series of Goldsmith recordings that he's doing the past couple of months through his Kickstarter. I think he might be the one that might continue that James Fitzpatrick legacy and hopefully keep Tadlow going.
I hope so.
He's incredibly talented. He's rescued so many scores. He's a film music hero in my eyes. He actually, I'm part of the International Film Music Critics Association, and we gave him a special award for his work as a film score reconstructionist, if that's a word, just for his heroic work. I think because of the work that he did on Salamander, which I don't think there was any notation at all, and he had to write the score out just by watching the movie. And that's how they recorded that score. It was lost. It's not around anywhere. And it was up to Lee Phillips to reconstruct that by ear.
I find that skill absolutely amazing.
It is amazing. Him and Kevin Casca did the same thing for Superman the movie for Perez Sarabande Records. That is one hell of a skill. Yeah, kudos to Lee Phillips for sure.
Yeah, absolutely.
So anything that he does, I would support him. Please support him. He's going to keep re-recordings alive. I think he's the one. I mean, he hasn't said anything about it, but I just think that he might have, got himself involved with James Fitzpatrick and Tadlow early enough to know the business, and hopefully continue that on for us who really like different interpretations of film music. I mean, Quartet Records is recording some new John Barry material, and thank goodness for them. So, and it's a dying art. The film score re-recording is definitely dying. It's going away. There aren't too many. I mean, there was a golden age back in like the 90s when we got so many of them, and now it's a rarity. So,
yeah, I mean, Entrada do them kind of every couple of years,
right? And they have to go through a Kickstarter as well.
Yeah.
But I think that's a great way of doing it. You just see how much interest there is. And instead of hoping that once you release it, someone will buy it. So yeah, support the labels, please, folks out there. Support these recordings. They're incredibly important to the history of film music.
I suppose if you do it the Kickstarter way, as you say, you can see who'd be interested in wanting this music, and then you can pre-sell the albums as well.
Exactly.
So
Yeah. So yeah, Thriller, 2 thumbs up.
yeah, definitely.
Johnny brings up Leviathan. Yes, we will be getting Leviathan in 1988, 89?
89, I think that was.
89. Next up from Goldsmith is Seconds from 1966. I just recently got this quartet, re-released it on CD and LP. And I love the pipe organ on it.
It was so oddly paired by La La Land with IQ.
What the heck was that
about? Well, that's one of the most bizarre soundtrack releases I think I have ever seen. Those two aren't related whatsoever.
No.
At least I don't think they are. And they're just in totally opposite ends of, the genre of like romantic comedy, fantasy romantic comedy. And then you got this John Frankenheimer movie, which is what did he say in the liner notes, that it's the only film that he created that was a failure, but actually became quite successful later on because it's become a cult classic or something along those lines. I might have missed that quote, but I'll see if I could pull it up. It's actually an interesting quote, and I think it's in the Quartet album. Yeah, it's the only movie that's ever gone from failure to classic without ever having been a success.
That's quite a good quote, actually.
It is, yeah. I haven't seen it myself, but
I have. I used to have it on Blu-ray, and I have no idea what happened to my copy of it. But I mean, it is a good film, but it's an incredibly disturbing film as well. Yeah.
I looked it up on Google Play, but it's still like $15 or $20 to buy on Google Play.
Really?
Yeah.
But, yeah, I listened to a couple of tracks from this yesterday, just in preparation for today, and I think it's the opening, the main title, just deep, reverberating organ, and just really impressive stuff. But yeah, it goes well with the film. That's all I'll say. So
it's distinctly Goldsmith, though, isn't it?
It is. Yeah, definitely is.
Yeah, the odd instrumentation, just, if anybody else had used those instruments, I don't think they would have done it the same way Goldsmith did. Just again, Goldsmith voice is so easy to distinguish, but it just seems so modern, more so than maybe any other composer who came up during that time, because you could transplant some of the work that he did back in the 60s, even some of his radio work and television work, and it would fit in modern cinema, I think, perfectly well. And those styles, like there's an evolution of the way he composed, for sure. I mean, after Total Recall, a lot of things changed to a more simplified version of composing, but that was purposeful. But it still was distinctly Goldsmith, and it just seems like he established his style early enough and stuck with it. And no matter what weird things that he did, it just always sounded distinctly Goldsmithian, but it never sounded dated. And I think that's the key to it. Some of the stuff might have, like some of the some of the synthesized stuff that he came up in the 80s might be considered dated, but still there's a lot of the orchestral material and his the advanced symphonic writing, the odd time signatures, things that those became his signatures, and it stuck with him throughout his entire career. And I think that's what's so utterly fascinating about Goldsmith. He was so talented, so early. He wrote some extraordinary material that a lot of composers, it would take them decades to get to that point.
Yeah. But I made, so when I was listening to Seconds, I just put a few quick notes. I put opening organ cue is deep and powerful, and I wrote twisted funeral music.
Yeah.
If you wanted some twisted, really weird music at your own funeral, play music from seconds, and you'll clear out the church in no time.
That is a perfect description. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Is the film worth watching?
It is. It is worth watching. I keep saying this, Dan. You know, I love film music because of the connection it has for me with the film. And it would always give you that extra bit of context. If you know, if you like music to a film, watch the film and see how it's used in the film. Sometimes that can, you know, give a deeper meaning to you or a deeper appreciation of the music. But you listened to Close Encounters music first before you saw the film, didn't you?
For years, yeah.
Yeah, and you weren't that enamored with the film once you saw it.
Yeah.
No. So
it's like the day I understood what people mean when they say, "Oh, the book is better." I'm like, what? You know, that's kind of like how I would describe it.
Okay. That's it.
What about the Mephisto Waltz, 1971? This is one of my personal favorite Goldsmith scores. I think it's creepier than The Omen, and I love the string work on it.
Mm-hmm. If I had to put together a top 5 Goldsmith like horror scores, this is this is in there for me. I knew nothing about it when I got the album and played it, and this might have been one of back when I got it was probably the earliest Jerry Goldsmith score I heard. So I was a little skeptical because around that time I just wasn't into anything that was, let's say, older than 1977. So a lot of like, you know, 70s, 60s Golden Age scores just kind of went, you know, I didn't even pay attention to them. But this is one of those early ones where I was like, wow, this is something special. And I think, again, just capturing the atmosphere of the movie without overdoing it. Again, you think about a film about, you know, devil worshiping, but I mean, he does quote the Dies Irae, and I think in the liner notes it's mentioned that it's Franz Liszt that he's quoting from in the score, and he does it quite extensively. I'm not too familiar with his work to know what he's quoting, but in the liner notes, I think Robert Townsend mentions that he was frequently quoting from Liszt in this score. So that's fascinating. I'd like to know what pieces he was quoting from. I think there was a piano piece that he might have been quoting from. But anyway, I think it's absolutely dynamite. I hope one day that there's a cleaned up version of it. I think they could probably do much better of making the sound even better than what it is. But like I said, top 5 Goldsmith horror scores for me. This one, it gets listened to a lot during this time of year.
Okay, my only kind of exposure to the Mephisto Waltz, I've never seen the film, is the 3 tracks that were on this.
Oh,
so
Do you not have the soundtrack that's available? No.
So
I wonder if it's easy to find. I think didn't it come out in like one of those like Fox Classics series that I think Nick Redman was doing with Perez?
It came out in a box set, and you can sometimes find it just floating around on eBay. And there was another printing of it in a jewel case, but I forget who did it.
Yeah, so this is Perez's release, and it was in conjunction with 20th Century Fox and Nick Redman. And it comes with a suite from The Other, which is actually really good as well. So that, and this came out when, I mean, I'm wondering when they released it, 97, because this is when they changed their spines. So I thought it came out a little bit earlier than that during the kind of maroon spine days, but it's a great score, good notes. And Nick Redman, just rescuing as many scores as he could through 20th Century Fox. He was a treasure, that's for sure.
Have either of y'all actually watched the film?
No, I haven't, but I'm intrigued by it because of the music.
I got it. I bought it off Google Play because Boom and I were going to do it this month for October, but then Ian came along and messed up everything. So,
whoa!
Oh man,
my bad.
You had your hurricane thing going on down in Florida, remember?
Oh yeah.
Yeah. So you already forgot about it.
I'm not in Florida.
Well, your hurricane was.
It wasn't my hurricane.
It was named after you.
Oh, I
was like, what are you talking about? I thought you was talking to somebody in the chat.
I thought it's Daniel okay? What's going on? Yeah, I understand now.
I do need to sit down and watch it though, because it looks like messed up. That's all I can say.
It does.
Just watch the trailer, and it's like, wow, this was made in the 70s. Wow.
Okay, I'm going to try and read the trailer.
The strings on it are just amazing. And then as on that soundtrack, the other, which came out in 1972, just kind of creepy music, but it's not. I've never found it to be. It's never done much for me. I mean, it's okay.
I think there's music from the other on this as well.
It's probably the suite. So if it's 22 minutes long, then that's the suite that's on here. And I'm curious whether that's all that's in the score. I'm not sure.
I'll tell you something, this Jerry Goldsmith at 20th Century Fox box is great, but it's not great with the track listings. I can't really find any track listings. Tells you all about each individual film, but doesn't tell you. Oh, I'm talking through my rear end. The other, it's got the main title, The Brothers and the Flight. So it's not the suite. So it's.
So was the other released some other time?
Yeah. So there's kind of 4, 5, 6. There's about 7 minutes of music from the other on the Jerry Goldsmith box set.
That's interesting because I mean, there's definitely bootlegs out there, but I don't know whether this came out at some other time. That's interesting. Let's take a look and see if we can find it. Yeah, a lot of shady kind of releases. I don't think it ever came out before 1997. It's interesting they were able to kind of separate out those 3 cues. Interesting. All right. What else do we have?
Crawl Space, 1972 TV movie.
Unfamiliar with it. When you told me this morning, it was the first time I ever heard of it.
Yeah. I found, I guess it's the main title on YouTube. It's horrible sound quality. And I read a snippet on the internet. A couple find a boy living underneath their home in the crawl space, and they bring him inside to the house to think it's going to have a happy ending, and it doesn't. It's about all I could find out about the movie. But yeah, I would say it's definitely a forgotten Goldsmith score.
I think so.
Anybody in the chat know anything about Crawl Space? And down here, I see signs for the Crawl Space Ninjas. Not exactly what you think. They just come in and like put plastic underneath your house and make it look pretty. but I'm like, ninjas? No, not really.
Yeah, not much really said about it. I had no idea. So I'll have to give a listen to that main theme. But yeah, and I think it came out on DVD back in 2007, but not much else. So that might be interesting premiere release sometime down the line.
What about the reincarnation of Peter Proud?
It's interesting that you brought that up.
It's next in chronological order.
I have never seen the film, and have never heard the score. I haven't heard one track of the score.
It's funny. I have it, and I have yet to spin it. And didn't that just recently come out, or recently? Didn't Entrada release it?
Yeah, I think it was Entrada. Yeah,
and I also think that like Harkit, that bootleg company out in Europe, released it at some point. Maybe it wasn't Harkit, but yeah, Entrada released it. When did they? 2018. And I have it, and I have never listened to it. And every time you know what? It might just be there's just something about the name of it, and it just throws me off. I don't know what it is, what it's going to be, and then I just kind of like, oh, maybe I'll listen to that some other day, and I never ever get to it. So maybe I'll have to remedy that for sure.
Oh, I watched the trailer on YouTube, and I've listened to the score on YouTube.
Is it any good?
No.
Obviously not.
It's weird.
Huh.
It just struck me as like weird, and I'm like, yeah, let me find something else. That's how it struck me. I'll go back.
You weren't that impressed with it.
I wasn't. I mean, I'll go back to it at some point. The trailer looked kind of interesting. This guy, I mean, is having adult time with his wife and calls her the wrong name, and she gets all upset. And he's like, "No, it's that lady from my dream, honey." And it's like, wow, you're taking the whole deeper, buddy. But he starts remembering all these other things, and he starts investigating. And I think his person who he was married to at one point ended up killing him with a boat oar in the lake or something. And that's what I gathered from the trailer.
But how would you describe the music though? I mean, was it? You say it's weird. Is it fully orchestral, or is it a smaller kind of group of musicians? I mean,
it didn't strike me as being great orchestral work. It had like a weird texture to it. Does that make sense?
So, based on,
I listened to it. I listened to it last week because I was like, I need to listen to like every Goldsmith horror score I can before this week. And I was laying in bed at the end of the day, and I was like, okay, Reincarnation of Peter Proud. I know I've never listened to it. And I'm like, let me find something else. Hopefully, Ian loves this and he can talk about it. You let me down, but
oh, my bad.
It's okay.
So
it's hard to believe it came out the year before The Omen, and The Omen is just like so spectacular.
Yeah,
and it came out what 4 years after? Yeah, the Mephisto Waltz. It's sandwiched right in between there, and it's just forgettable for me. Maybe I'm being overly critical.
Well, I don't think this is a type of film that needs to go that big. I think it's more kind of internal and retrospective, and based on the description of the score through Entrada. I mean, this is what they say about the ingredients of the movie, that it includes romance, lust, murder, incest, even a touch of the occult. And so what Goldsmith does with his score, and this is quite intriguing, and this is probably one of the reasons why I'm now going to listen to it, is he kind of starts small with like this chamber-sized string ensemble, and it includes some electronics. But then as the story goes along, the orchestral size begins to expand, which I find then very fascinating. And And I kind of like the way that composers work this way, where you can start with one small idea and then just make it expand throughout the running time of the film, and then it becomes absolutely, monstrous and huge by the time you get to the end of that. I don't know if that's the case with this one, but I do, upon reading that the orchestral forces increase significantly. And apparently he wrote a beautiful love theme for piano and strings and flute. And there's some solo trumpet work that apparently evokes Chinatown. Whether it is a great Goldsmith score, again, I'm going to have to wait until I actually hear it, but it was an important Goldsmith score for especially Goldsmith collectors, because it was one of those kind of last remaining. I mean, there's still a few out there that still haven't received a actual first release, but this album, this score was just caught up in rights issues for decades. And apparently it was Bing Crosby Productions that were actually holding all of this up until it finally the tapes were found through an AFF member involved in the score back in 1975. So wherever they found that, who knows? And Toronto secured all the licensing from the current rights holders of Paramount Pictures. It was really strange that, again, you had to wait till 2018 to hear a premiere album release of a score from Jerry Goldsmith that was released in 1975. And again, people are just, you think about, people complaining about, oh, how come this hasn't been released? How come this should be released? We demand this be released. But we never know what's happening behind the scenes and who's holding things up and what the hurdles that these record companies and producers have to go through just to get this out for the very first time. We really got to give our labels a break from complaining. I mean, sure, they might make mistakes, but there's an interesting story that goes behind this soundtrack. And even if it's not the best thing Goldsmith produced, man, you've got to respect the effort that went in to finally get this released. It's crazy.
I'll be honest, I got maybe like 5 minutes in and I'm just like, I'm going something else. And you mentioned that the orchestral bit grows according to the Intrado thing they wrote about it. So
yeah, it apparently goes into this full-blooded action horror mode by the time you get to the end.
Yeah, and maybe if Birdman had more patience and wasn't so judgmental.
Yeah. Well, and I was judgmental based on the title, right? The title turned me off, which is really weird.
The cover art isn't very appealing either.
No, it's not. I prefer the kind of the alternate cover. The original one looks really strange. But I kind of like the one with the floating heads and the weird tree and the red and oranges. But the original cover looks like something else.
I will make a point to listen to the whole thing tonight.
I think I'm going to do the same thing.
Start to finish. Ian, can we count you in?
You can count me in.
We'll come back next week and we'll talk about it.
Next week we're talking about Peter Proud. Yeah.
I'll listen to it tomorrow though, because it's
tomorrow. That's fine. That's fine. And then we get to a little film called The Omen in 1976. I've never heard of this film myself.
So I will talk about it in a different way once you guys have finished having your say. So
Ian, go.
Okay. Well, we briefly discussed this last week when we were talking about horror scores in general, and I said I liked it, but I didn't listen to it that often because I found it quite a hard listen. It had been some time since I actually listened to it, and I listened to the score yesterday or Saturday or yesterday, one of the days, and it literally been years since I'd listened to it. And you know what? I really, really enjoyed it. It's one of those things. I keep mentioning it. I'm getting older. I'm discovering I like things now that I didn't like years ago, and I thought this was absolutely fantastic. So I've kind of come round to the listening experience being better than I remember it being. So I always thought it was a great score, but I just didn't listen to it away from the film that much because I didn't find it that listenable. But I've changed my mind. It is scary. There is some challenging stuff in there, but it's so much better and so much richer than I remember it ever being. So thank you for doing this thing tonight to make me revisit this and reevaluate the Oscar-winning Omen by Jerry
His
Goldsmith.
only Oscar.
Yeah, shamefully. But yeah, that's my tuppence worth.
Well, the Catholic schoolboy in me always feels bad for liking The Omen, but yeah, I love that. All three of them masterpieces, and all separate identities too. Which one do I like the most? I don't know. Like, I don't know. Kind of hard to pick, but I love the chanting in it. The love theme that he wrote in The Omen. It's got some beautiful music in it for such a horrific film. Whoa, wait. David Pensack's got an autographed copy of The Omen. Dude. Wow. I just need to sit here and like marvel at that for a moment. Anders says Omen is the most powerful masterpiece ever created. I don't know about ever created. Yeah, it's up there. Yeah. I don't know, like, I think Boomer, we did The Omen last year in October. We did all three films. And until then, I really hadn't listened to it that much. But once you start listening to The Omen, it's kind of hard just to switch out to something else.
Well, years ago, I was different. I used to start listening to it and think, oh, it's not doing it for me, and I'd skip to another track or move the needle to another track. And I can understand why it was used in the film, but I just don't want to listen to it. But as I said yesterday or whatever it was, I've changed my mind. It's a really good score.
What about Bram Stoker's Dracula? I know it's not Goldsmith, but to me, it's a similar score. It's heavy. It's got the chanting. It's very driving. But you loved that score when it came out, didn't you?
I think there's a bit more of a romantic edge to Bram Stoker's Dracula, with the love story kind of threaded through it. I think it was that kind of made it more accessible to me.
Is that more in the movie? Because I don't feel a lot of that in the score. I feel it in the movie for sure, but not so much the score.
Well, yeah, maybe in the shorter score and in the kind of release score from 1992. It maybe stands out more because I haven't heard this. Well, I've got a link to the 3-disc version on YouTube that somebody's put up there. I think David Pensack gave me that link, but I haven't actually listened to the full kind of 3-hour version of the score or whatever that's the 3-disc soundtrack covers. But yeah, but the one disc version I think is slightly more romantic than Goldsmith's Omen.
I know what you mean, and it's a different type of romance. Like Goldsmith's love theme is just dead on a love theme.
Yeah.
In The Omen, the thing about Dracula, it's this tragic gothic romance that weaves its way through the music, and that one it's a little bit more. It's more on the kind of lush side than it is on that driving, stabbing horror music that you get in The Omen, and that's what differentiates the two. And I can understand why. I mean, that original album, Dracula album, is incredible. It's a great listen. But that's the story that's being told through that music. Whereas, the relationship between mother and father in The Omen is addressed. It's not central. I mean, it's part of the story, but of course, it's Damien and all of the evil that comes with him, and that's what's central into the score to The Omen. So very, very different approaches, of course, but very different movies and different feels. I mean, Dracula's in that kind of fantasy genre where The Omen is supposed to feel more grounded in reality.
Yeah, definitely.
With those kind of horror elements. And so I can understand where Ian's coming from, because I also have a very difficult time getting into the Omen on album. I recognize its greatness in the film, and I've seen the film twice, and I still think Goldsmith, it's one of his great achievements, and easily the best score of 1976, no doubt. But it's not one that I go to often. And if I am going to listen to The Omen, I listen to the incredible suite that now I'm not 100% sure whether it was actually arranged by Jerry Goldsmith or somebody else. And I'm pretty sure it's the same material in both. The first time I heard The Omen suite was on one of those Silva compilations. And it is a powerhouse of a piece, and it's about 10 to 11 minutes long, and it just contains the major highlights of the score. But there is a rare recording of it where Goldsmith was conducting an orchestra in Japan. He went on tour out there in the 90s, I think. I can't be sure, but it's the Kanagawa Philharmonic Orchestra, and he did a couple of shows out there. And what makes the album rare itself is that only the people that attended that concert got the album, and it's basically a recording of that presentation. And on one of the discs, there's two of them. You get Supergirl, Star Trek the Motion Picture, Alien, The Swarm, Air Force One, and then you get the Omen Suite, as conducted by Jerry Goldsmith. It sounds incredible. It's full orchestra, full chorus. The love theme, I think, sounds well. I mean, I think it sounds better than the silver release, but I'm so used to the silver release as well of that suite. But that's where I go to listen to get my fill of The Omen. And I think if you appreciate that score, you'd go out and you'd check out the suite. And then if you could find this rare album, I mean, I don't personally own it. Someone sent it to me for my radio show, thank goodness. But it's dynamite. It's got this amazing suite too on one of the other albums. That's Rudy and the Hoosiers, but it's a full orchestral version of the Hoosiers without the synthesizers, and it has a real drum kit, and it's a really unique arrangement of the Hoosiers. So, but yeah, the Omen again. I love it. Great appreciation for it, but it's not one that I reach for to listen to on its own in its complete form.
It's funny you should mention that Japanese concert, because I was listening to the Goldsmith Odyssey last week, and they did one. I don't know when it was. It was quite a while ago, but they mentioned that concert, and they played their version of Supergirl.
Yep.
And it's one of the best. You hardly ever hear Supergirl. I've heard it done by the Cincinnati Pops. It was done before the film came out by Roy Budd and the London Symphony Orchestra.
Yes.
That's
a neat arrangement, isn't it?
It is. It's a faster paced arrangement.
Yes.
And this version by the Japanese. What's the name of the Japanese orchestra again?
Kanagawa. Kanagawa Philharmonic. Now, like I said, there's two albums that I have, and I'm not sure whether it was a 2 CD set that was given up, or it was like this album was given one night and this album was given the other night. But Planet of the Apes is on this one as well, and they perform the hell out of that suite. And then you get the Tiny Creatures suite, which everybody's been wanting to hear, and it's Small Soldiers and Gremlins together.
I heard that at the 70th birthday concert that Jerry conducted here in Edinburgh, and it's just a lovely suite, and has it ever been recorded? Because
no, it hasn't. I think this is the only way you can hear it, like in good quality. I mean, it's a properly recorded. Again, he might have recorded this before the concert. I don't think it was during the concert. I can't even now remember whether it was actually during the concert. It couldn't have been, because they gave out CDs as gifts during the concert. So I would love it if they eventually release these.
Yeah.
But you can find them online. Again, finding a legit copy, I don't know how you would, but I know that one has like it's penciled artwork of Goldsmith's profile, and it's just on the CD. I don't think there's a cover. They're super expensive, like hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of dollars because they're so rare. But again, I'm not sure whether it's on YouTube if you get a chance to listen to it. But yeah, there's the Omen Suite, I think, is masterfully performed, but you also get these wonderful suites, like I said, Rudy and Hoosiers together. Again, the way they segue from one another isn't all that impressive, but it's just neat to hear them together and how they work, and especially the tiny creatures suite. It's just it's delightful, absolutely delightful.
But the 94 BBC concert orchestra suite of the Omen, is that?
I don't know what that one is. And I'm not sure whether it's been released or not. And if it has, I'd love to hear it.
If that's the same one I'm thinking of, I think there might be a recording of that on YouTube.
Is it like from a radio broadcast?
It might be, yeah.
Okay.
I think so, yeah.
All right. Interesting.
Yeah.
But it's a great suite.
I'm curious because both of you said that the score was like kind of a hard listen. You don't go to it, kind of heavy and everything.
I don't think it's a difficult listen. I just there's a certain mood about it that it's tough for me to get into. Again, it's not poorly written. It's not bad. It's not anything that's off-putting. I just don't reach for it. Much like if I want to listen to the Omen, I'm going for the Final Conflict every day.
Yeah.
That one, those just that's a totally different score though, but that is more in my wheelhouse than the Omen. But again, the Omen isn't bad. It's tough for me to explain it, but I just don't find much. Let's say joy might be the wrong word. Maybe not enjoyment of the complete album, but I hope you know what I'm talking about. It's a tough one to just want to get into for me. Yeah.
I mean, if I'm cooking food in the kitchen and I know I'm going to be in there for an hour, I'm not going to put the Omen on. That's for sure.
Right. Yeah. I think it has to be one of those ones where you have to be in a very specific mood to want to listen to it. And that's why I go for, like, if I want to listen to it, give me 11 minutes of the suite and I can move on to something else.
Yeah. That suite is on that album, which was a lot of people scoff at this album, but I think if you're new to the world of Jerry Goldsmith, there is some brilliant stuff on there.
And which album is that?
It first came, I think, earlier came out on that, right? So that was the 2-disc set. And I think you have the 4-disc set. They just kept on adding more and more and more.
Yeah.
But this has a weird. Does yours have the Star Trek Symphonic Suite?
No,
it's like 18 minutes long.
Does it?
So it goes from the motion picture to the Klingon TAC, then Star Trek Voyager, then First Contact, and then that's it. There's 4 scores, right? And about in there.
All right, no, I don't think so. No, it's got Star Trek the motion picture. I might have them, but it's kind of separated. It's got Star Trek Voyager. It's got Star Trek Nemesis on here as well.
Wow. Yeah, it's quite intriguing. I mean, they did a whole suite of Under Fire. First Night. Yeah, these are they're interesting albums because they contain really interesting arrangements. I mean, not all the performances are great, but the Omen Suite is on this one. It's the 9th track on disc 1, and I think that's copied over to various other silver compilations as well.
It does have suites from The Boys from Brazil and the Great Train Robbery, or First Great Train Robbery, and they're both really well done.
Yeah.
Sometimes they're quite difficult to get the way you remember it,
mm-hmm.
And they do it quite well on those ones. So, yeah, but
Hector
Anyway,
says
I
the
digress.
94 is on YouTube, and Goldsmith serves as host for the radio.
Oh,
That's
cool.
right,
Conducts Alfred
Can
Newman, Rosa Norse 2001, and Herman Psycho Suite.
can Hector add the link to that YouTube video into the chat, just so I can reference that later, and other people can reference that too?
Eric,
Yeah.
That'd be great.
I've got that saved on
Oh, do you?
on YouTube on my list. So
Okay.
I'll once it's done, I'll put a link into the
Perfect.
into the comments.
That's great. Thank you, Hector.
Thank you. That might be something worth watching as a community at some point.
Oh, you know, that's a great idea. Absolutely.
Well, what I would say, it's an audio recording. It's not a video recording.
Right.
Cool.
Okay, next on
Coma.
the list.
Should we consider Coma a horror film? I'm not even sure what Coma's about. I'm guessing someone's in a coma.
I'd call it more of a kind of science fiction thriller.
Yeah, I think so too.
Okay.
But it is, that's the score that doesn't start until like halfway through the film. Is that right? With Coma?
It's years since I've seen the film, and it's decades since I've seen the film. So,
What about 1978 Magic?
Magic is it's,
I would call that a psychological thriller.
yeah, but it's twisted. It's
Yeah,
definitely a twisted
it
score.
is.
But you know what? I'm actually reading the liner notes right now, and they made mention in the La La Land release, 1978 was a banner year for Jerry Goldsmith. Wrote no fewer than 7 major scores. Coma. I mean, just listen to Coma, Capricorn 1, The Omen 2, The Swarm, The Boys from Brazil, and The Great Train Robbery, and Magic.
All that in 1 year. That's incredible.
And if you think about if a composer did that today, you'd be like, oh my God. Additional composers, they might have just written a theme and handed it off. And that's fair based on the way film composing works today and all the challenges that go along with modern film and film composing. But back then, there is no doubt that Goldsmith wrote every single freaking note of these scores.
Yeah.
And you just, where do you find that? And not only it's the sheer amount, it's just how many classics are there in that list. I would say all of them. I mean, Magic might be the one that people don't remember. Coma has an interesting story, but I think it's like anybody would put Capricorn 1, Omen 2, even though The Swarm was a piece of crap film, Boys of Brazil and The Great Train Robbery up there on like, if you would say that those one of your favorite scores, you'd be like, yeah, that makes sense because those scores are amazing.
Yeah.
Where do you find the time, man, and or just the sheer the creativity? They're all different. That's what's insane. They're all completely different. Blows my mind that composers can do this. And some, like I said, today you'd put some doubt in our minds as to who wrote what, but wow.
Are you saying Hans Zimmer doesn't write everything?
Like, I mean, I think we would even say that when James Horner had those banner years, he didn't write everything. And that's coming out more and more about the way that Horner would compose his music, but that's a whole other topic. There's just some sort, there's something of, there's some pride within Goldsmith and people like Goldsmith and Herman, even Howard Shore, who won't delegate things out. Everything that they do is theirs, with the exception of maybe the orchestrators who might have helped them, but they're all distinctly Goldsmith. So it's incredible that that's 1978. I mean, and then he's got to work on Star Trek: The Motion Picture, which is just a daunting task for any composer to write in just 1 year. And I mean, unbelievable. I mean, I don't get off a tangent, but it just blows my mind. 78 blows my mind for what Goldsmith accomplished.
You can understand when it came to the 90s that he kind of went for this simpler style of writing, because
yes, And
if you're doing those 78 level of scoring with that amount of films, with that amount of notes and just creativity, it must be just draining.
and I think he knew that the appreciation of his music, it's why he put that effort in. Why, and I think that's why his style changed in the 90s. I didn't even think that he mentioned it at some point where it was just like, after Total Recall, a score that probably almost killed him. It's like, what's the point when people don't really take notice of it? And I can understand that, being a composer who, I mean, this is what he wanted to do ever since he was, a kid. I mean, he said that. He's like, oh, he's one of the rare film composers that actually wanted to be a film composer. Other people just kind of like got into it, either by accident or it was a career that they thought of afterwards. But, the fact that Goldsmith was only awarded the Academy Award, which I think meant more back then than it does now, once, and just for the sheer amount of effort that he put into his scores, even for some of the most garbage movies you've ever seen. It's just, I can understand now. It's like, I'm just going to simplify things. They're still masterful scores, but the amount of musical complexity was hardly there throughout the 90s and the 2000s. Again, not saying that his music wasn't any good, because he wrote some bangers, but yeah, he was conscious of it for sure. And I think I'm pretty sure he was insulted by, his members who constantly said to him, you're great, we all admire you, but it's like, where's the recognition? And it wasn't there.
Yeah.
Anyway,
quite sad.
Yeah, but magic is fun. Check it out. It's weird. It's twisted. I mean, even the film is just bonkers. Yeah, go for it.
Boys from Brazil, same year.
Yeah.
I don't know if y'all consider that straight up horror film. The score, to me, has horror elements.
Yeah. I don't know if that's a horror movie in itself, but it's a great movie. Check that one out too. And that's a Franklin J. Schaffner collaboration. And, Goldsmith did some of his best work for him. So
that was one of those scores that I'd want. I mean, I had it on LP since kind of 1983 or something. And then when this kind of Entrada 2-disc version came out, I missed out on it, and then prices went through the roof, and then it came up on Amazon from a secondary seller, or whatever you call them, for £7.99.
Wow.
And I thought, well, it's got to be, it can't be the 2-disc one, and I checked, and it was. So I got that about 4 or 5 years ago for £7.99.
That's a steal.
I think I paid around 50 for mine.
How much?
50, I think.
Oh, I thought you said 150.
No.
There aren't too many albums where I've kind of like leapt out of my chair and almost put my head through the roof. Back to the Future was one of them. I clearly remember exactly where I was when that was announced. And I leapt up in very low ceilings in my basement and cracked my head on the ceiling. But then, that was at the time where you're like, oh, am I ever going to see a release of this score? Will I ever get a chance to actually own it? Yeah. And that Back to the Future was one where I was like, I can't believe that we're now living a time where Back to the Future is out. But then I remember when Boys from Brazil was announced, I'm like, holy smokes, the Holy Grails are now all finally being released. I mean, a day and age now, you're like, oh, everything's out. But back then, you're like hoping that Boys from Brazil comes out. And when I got that one, when I heard that one, it was instant purchase, and I was over the moon. And I've been like that with a couple of other releases, but those two I clearly remember going, wow, I'm going to get to finally own it. Instead of having to go to YouTube or wherever or listen to a suite of it somewhere. It was great to, you don't have too many of those moments now, but
no. But
that was a great time to be alive.
Yeah. But Do you know what? I remember on a similar one, but I'd always wanted Damnation Alley.
Yeah.
And when it was announced that all the electronics were lost and they had to recreate them, and was that Lee Phillips again
Yes.
doing his magic on
Yeah.
that, and he did a fantastic job on that as well. I mean, the film is an absolute pile of crap, but I've always loved the score. So that was one of those moments where I thought, oh, it's finally being released.
Yeah.
So
I mean, you would, and then we all thought it was never going to be released because of the electronics. So we all knew the electronics were gone. And we're like, there's no way you're going to be able to do it without it. And I'm glad that people embraced the idea of, recreating the electronics, recreating them as authentically as possible. And I don't think anybody cares. I mean, if they sounded really ridiculous, but again, you're talking to Lee Phillips here. The guy just cares way too much about film music. And I'm glad people embraced that idea. It could be sacrilege to some, but I think that, if you can add that element in order to get the rest of that score out, I'm all for it.
Yeah, absolutely.
What about The Omen 2, same year?
Again, great score. I rarely listen to it. I think the only reason that I listened to it a few years ago, I think that might be one of the earliest Goldsmith, Eric Tomlinson recordings. Correct me if I'm wrong, Ian, was that one recorded in LA and then re-recorded in London, or were they both recorded in London?
No, this was recorded in LA, and then the soundtrack album was with the National Philharmonic in London.
And that was Tomlinson re-recording that or recording that one. So that piqued my interest. But again, not one I reach for very often. And I don't even think I've seen that movie. I've seen 1 and 3. I don't think I've seen 2. I might have to rectify that this Halloween.
2's better than 3.
Yeah, 3's a piece of crap for sure.
I think 3 had a story, but it just never quite gelled.
I agree. There's an interesting story, absolutely. Just the execution was piss poor. But
interestingly, re-listening to this yesterday for tonight, listening to the 2 different versions, there's more pronounced kind of synth work on the actual film version of the score. But there's a track on here called Snowmobiles, which is just an absolutely wonderful, joyous, upbeat piece of fluff right in the middle. It's just a great piece of Goldsmith letting loose with the orchestra and having a wonderful, you wouldn't believe it was from an Omen film. It's just people having fun on snowmobiles and a nice, happy piece of score.
It's a happy part of the movie.
Yeah, but it's just a wonderful, lovely piece of music as well. And it's after all that heavy kind of, oh my God, this is, and then this lovely la 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 la. It's just a wonderful little break. It all goes back. It all goes to Ratchet after that, in a good way for Jerry Goldsmith goodness. But it's just it was just a lovely surprise to get to that. And I think it had its premiere on this deluxe edition release. So yeah.
Is that so? That's only available in the original soundtrack itself, recorded in LA. He did not record it?
It wasn't on the original album.
Interesting.
That track.
Interesting.
So he chose not to re-record that for the album.
And I probably would have left it off the album too, because Ian's right. It does. If you're listening to the Omen 2, it's balls to walls, satanic Omen turned up to like 23 with snorting Red Bull, and then you get to that snowmobile track, and you're like, am I listening to the same record? It does kind of have that jarring effect on you, and then it goes right back to more,
I'm glad it's on there because it is a lovely piece of music, but it's like, whoa, what's this?
Fascinating.
The Swarm, 1978.
Is that a horror film?
I enjoyed the movie when I saw it in 7th grade on Sunday afternoon on the TV because it was better than football. And I bought the La La Land release, and I enjoy that CD, and I'm not ashamed of it.
You shouldn't be ashamed because it's a masterpiece of a score. It just doesn't belong with that film at all. It does.
The film is
the
appalling.
film doesn't deserve it. That's the thing. I mean, it's a disaster film that is an absolute disaster.
Okay, I haven't seen the film since like 7th grade. Was it really that bad of a film?
Yeah, it's bad. It's terrible.
It's about killer bees, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
People
Okay.
just throwing bees on people. It's terrible. It's like, they just milking. Well, I mean, this is coming after Jaws, so I mean, if you much later after Jaws, but if you're thinking about like, what animals can you use to frighten people with? And by the way, I'm just a little bit of a tangent. There's a great YouTube channel out there that and I wish I can remember the name of it because I just subscribed to them, where they kind of do in-depth reviews of films that are inspired by another film. So, for instance, there's like the Die Hard ripoffs, or the Jaws ripoffs, or the Bond ripoffs, and they are lengthy and very well researched.
Is this the English guy?
Yeah, very kind of flat and plain. Great jokes.
It's very funny as well.
Very funny.
I subscribed to him a couple of weeks ago.
Okay, good. Yeah, and
Can't remember
the Die Hard one is in 2 parts, and I mean the amount of movies he goes through and checks. So anyway, Swarm is on the Jaws one, where it's like they exploit every type of animal using the Jaws formula, with except the Swarm is definitely not the Jaws formula. But I mean, this is at the tail end, Swarm of the disaster craze, and also that kind of trying to capture the Jaws phenomenon with scary animals or bugs. There's a movie that was, what was it called? They were using like ants as the scary monster in the film, and it's like ants. I mean, if you stand still, maybe you'll die from an ant bite. But yeah. So anyway, do you have the name of the channel?
Yeah, it's the Bad Movie Bible.
The Bad Movie Bible. Okay. And yes, it is. Yeah. At least I think
the same one.
Yeah. The best, worst, and weirdest Die Hard knockoffs. That was from 2 months ago. But there's Terminator, Jawsploitation, the Bond knockoffs. They're about an hour each, and the time goes just like that. Because I'm just invested in every single movie this guy has watched, and he picks the greatest clips too. Very entertaining channel, but you learn a lot because you don't realize how many bad Die Hard movies are out there, or just the amount of movies that were ripping off Jaws, and for some reason didn't get sued because I think they were filming in a different country, and like, I mean, Universal's like, whatever. But the story beats are the exact same, and they find that there's Hooper, there's Brody, there's Quint. It's hilarious. Anyway, that's my tangent. Hopefully for the day.
It's a great tangent.
Yeah, but check out that channel. It's awesome.
Yeah. So when it comes to Swarm, I don't have the La La Land version. I have the Prometheus, which is a good representation of the score, I think.
Mm-hmm.
But, what was extra on the La La Land release that made that one?
I think the big thing was the sonic upgrade.
Right.
It sounds amazing. Just great. I mean, there's probably some extra tracks as well, but it just sounds so good.
So it's worth upgrading from the Prometheus.
Yeah, probably.
Daniel's nodding.
And I mean, it's just the presentation is AAA too. Just unbelievable. It's a great release. A lot of care went into that one.
Okay, well, you sold me on that, so I'm going to buy that now.
A little film called Alien came out in 1979.
Not
Never heard of it.
Never heard of
Thank you.
Alien? Yeah, I thought it was a more obscure film. I've got the soundtrack. I think I've seen it a time or two.
Well,
I heard there was a lot of problems in the editing room. They didn't like some Goldsmith score, and they replaced it with other Goldsmith music, and they brought in some classical music. And apparently, no one told Jerry Goldsmith, and he was sitting there at the premiere, and he's like, "Wait a minute, that's not what I wrote. Wait, I wrote that for another film. What the hell, people?" So
That sounds like Alex North at the premiere of 2001.
But at least Goldsmith's music survived. It's
Yeah.
in the film.
Yeah.
And sometimes even if it's not from the score that he or music that he wrote, for that film. But the story is fascinating. It's heartbreaking. Randy Andrews and I went into a deep dive on this score. I think it was one of our better episodes of Soundtrack Alley, actually. And it's mainly big thanks due to the release. Again, this is probably another one of those ones where I nearly put my head through the ceiling in my basement. Again, hearing after all these years, we're never going to be able to get Alien complete. And when we finally did, the information inside the booklet was just as valuable as the release of the score itself. Just telling that story as to what changed, why it changed, whose problem it was. And of course, there's that great documentary on the making of Alien, which goes into depth of the creation of that score. But I will say this, though. There are elements, or there were changes that were made. Terry Rawlings is the guy who made these changes. People keep blaming Ridley Scott. Ridley Scott was young and impressionable, and he let Terry Rawlings basically take over the edit and take over the selection of the music. So I would say that any decision they made musically was because of Terry Rawlings, because he basically brought in his soundtrack collection and put it into the film and said, "Jerry, do this." The couple of changes that I do appreciate happen at the beginning of the film, and that is the elimination of the Alien main theme on that solo trumpet. And I think the idea of stripping that away and just letting the atmosphere take over, the visuals of them going through the spaceship, the empty spaceship, which is a haunted house essentially, and then hearing just kind of Goldsmith's eerie echoplexed music without that theme romanticizing space, I think works a lot better than the original cues. Having said that, anything else that was replaced was completely bananas and bonkers, and adding Hanson at the end of the film literally makes no thematic sense whatsoever. Again, if you don't know that that's not Jerry Goldsmith or that's Hanson or what that has to do with anything, most likely the general public, they don't care. But as you dive deeper into the making of this score, and then the usage of that end title, which contains the main theme of the film, which we eventually hear, I think, for the very first time in the picture during the landing, I mean, that makes thematic sense. And especially there's a couple of heroic uses of that theme as well that, again, were nixed during editing. But so, yeah, there were a couple of changes that I appreciate. There's others where it just doesn't make any sense. Having Goldsmith go back and have to rewrite his cues and then having even those cues tossed. From what I remember, there's only one surviving cue that plays from start to finish in its complete form in the film. Everything else is edited, chopped up, smashed to bits, replaced, or whatever. And look, the cues from Freud are actually quite effective. And being someone who wasn't a soundtrack fan soundtrack fan, collector, whatever, when I first saw the movie, I didn't know the difference. But I do find that the Freud cues are quite effective. They don't seem out of place to me unless you're intimately familiar with that score and you're like, hey, wait, that's from Freud. And that has happened with me with other films where it's like, hey, that cue doesn't belong there. So it was such a utter disaster musically. But I'm glad that Goldsmith was able to release a soundtrack with the cues that he wanted to back in the day. And now that we have this complete presentation of how it was supposed to be used, and then hearing the replacement cues in some sort of order, it's just a fascinating look into a moment in film music history that, again, without that album, I don't think you would understand what had happened and why it is just such one of the most fascinating stories I think that has come out of film music. So again, that's a really long-winded answer, but it's an effective score. It's a brilliant score. I'd put it on my top 5 Jerry Goldsmith horror scores and probably on my top 5 Jerry Goldsmith scores of all time. The fact that he wrote that in Star Trek the Motion Picture around the same time, again, we're talking about 1978 and crafting very different scores. I mean, he crafted 2 absolute masterpieces in that same year that go down as 2 of the best scores ever composed. It's just fascinating. Alien's fascinating. And I mean, it's such a great movie. Everything's great about it, with the exception of Terry Rawlings just sticking his fingers in everything and thinking he knows more than Jerry Goldsmith. And anyway,
from my point of view, and I think I mentioned this last week because we briefly mentioned this score last week, and I said I didn't have a problem with the Hanson music at the end, because until I became aware of what the history was with the music. I'd seen the film so many times that music was kind of baked into the film for me. That was part of the film, as you say, including the Freud cues as well, which to me just fitted in at that particular part of the film. It just seemed to be part of the film. So I never had a problem with the Hanson cue at the end, because it was quite a while later that I realized that, that was nothing to do with Jerry Goldsmith. It was just tacked in there, because they use a bit of Hanson as well for when they blow the alien out of the airlock at the end,
right,
as well, from one movement of that symphony anyway. So I never had a problem with that, and I quite liked that. But as all the history of it came out, I just wish they could have trusted Jerry and said, look, he knows what he's doing. He's been doing this for a while, and yeah, it's a sad story. It's a sad story.
It is. I mean, and you think about it, what's the most played cue from that album? It's the end title.
Yeah,
and it was never featured in the. Just the end title just has there's a sense of tragedy in it, instead of that instant relief that you get with the end title or with the Hanson material. It still feels like maybe this story isn't resolved, that there's something else that could happen to Ripley, and that's where that Goldsmith theme works. And again, it works musically within the fabric of the score that we just heard, where Hanson just seems like it just seems out of place.
Well, I mentioned this last week. With that Hanson music at the end, it changes the way you feel at the ending to me, because that Hanson music, I said this last week, was, it's such a soothing, beautiful piece of music. It's like somebody just rubbing your temples after, 2 hours of just being so tense that somebody's just there going, it's okay, you can just relax now, just la 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 la,
Mm-hmm.
Whereas if you had the Jerry Goldsmith cue at the end, it would leave you not quite so relaxed, leaving the theater. You'd be going, oh, all right, okay,
I like that feeling better.
Yeah.
And I think James Horner also did that with his end title as well. I mean, you get that real soothing end title music, but then it goes into something a little more ominous as it plays along. And I really kind of like that.
Yeah.
It just doesn't. It seems uncertain, and I don't mind that. But then again, it's an end title piece. Who sticks around for the end titles anyway? Right. I know we do. But yeah, it just, again, when you get in, when you dig deep into it, it thematically makes no sense whatsoever. And, but yeah, I mean, at least at the end of the day, Ridley Scott realized just how great of a score that was. I mean, he's very, he compliments it all the time, and on the any interview that he's doing, or the commentary, he did the same thing with Legend. I mean, that was exactly the same thing that happened with Legend. So Jerry got screwed, and it's just too bad that I mean, again, it doesn't feel like within Alien, it doesn't feel like it's a distraction with the changes that were made within the fabric of the film itself. Much like I can't, unless you knew intimately what the changes were in Aliens, you wouldn't know that that was heavily edited as well, except maybe in a couple of parts. So, yeah, but it makes for a great story.
Yeah.
And the release we're talking about, for those who do not know, Entrada, it's a 2-disc, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
A 2-disc set for Alien. I believe it's still available. It's well worth the money. To me, sometimes it feels like a textbook and not just quite like a listening experience, because there's a lot of information you kind of want to digest.
Well,
and Ian says, the film, if it's baked in your brain, your brain's going to try to put the music to the piece, and it's not always going to jive up, but it's something that's well worth investing some time in and learning about, because you'll also learn more about how you get the final product. If things just don't click, and things can get changed, and people may not know who worked on it, and they'll find out at the last minute. And there's so many hands going into the pot of a film. And it's amazing sometimes that anything good ever does get made.
You're right. I think when you talk about essential soundtracks, this is it. Even if you've never heard it before, you don't know what the heck it is. You have to own this. Have to. I think it's one of the most important scores in film music history. There's just a lot to learn from it.
Absolutely.
Dude, go ahead, Ian.
No, I was going to quickly say that, Eric has said sometimes the shorter kind of soundtrack albums are the better listening experiences. This, you get just about everything that was written, but you also get the original album on there as well. So you get that original listening experience with it as well. So.
And this is one of those rare complete scores where I can listen start to finish, and it just seems like it's an absolute breeze for me. But I like this style of music very much, but it just goes by. I remember doing the research for this. I think it was last year. And it was just on a constant repeat. It was on a constant loop. Just loved every single moment of it. And it would just dip into different playlists. And, like I said, goes into that album for about 38, 40 minutes. And then you get all those extra tracks in, but it all just flows so beautifully. Yeah, really, really great album. Just overall. I mean, not only one of the best scores ever composed, I think it's one of the greatest soundtrack releases of all time.
I think it took so long for that to come out because Jerry wasn't that keen on revisiting it, and I think it's in the notes in this. Douglas Fay kept saying, to Jerry when they were doing a new project, and Jerry would say, well, "What should we do next?" And Douglas Fay would say, "Alien." No. And eventually, Jerry said, "Yeah, how about Alien?"
Yeah.
So,
do either of y'all know? Because I know Ridley Scott likes to tinker with films forever. Is there a version of Alien that's been released that has the complete Goldsmith score as it was intended?
Just as an isolated score.
Yeah.
And it's worth it. So it's on that quadrilogy release.
Yes.
So you get Alien isolated, and I think you get As Heard and then As Intended. And the fascinating thing about that release, I think, is the isolated score of James Horner's Aliens and how well that works in its unedited form with the picture that as assembled, because it shouldn't work.
Yeah, it's the same. I got it on 4K because I had to because it's Alien.
Yeah.
But it's got 2 audio commentaries, and it's got the final theatrical isolated score by Jerry Goldsmith and the composer's original isolated score by Jerry. So it's got what he intended the score to be, but you could only watch the film with just the music. It wouldn't be with his original intentional score. So, but yeah, it's nice to hear it and see where things would have fitted in. So, yeah,
it's a great release.
Yeah.
And David is correct. Alien is an essential soundtrack for all your soundtrack collectors.
Yeah.
I just want to welcome Victor. Thank you for stopping by. It's okay that you're late. I understand. Life happens. We all have schedules.
Hi,
And
Victor.
we already discussed Mephisto Waltz earlier. We're going chronologically. That's easier than skipping around sometimes. This way we don't miss anything.
We have a lot of making up to do here. If we're going to get out of here on time. Or are we coming back next week?
Like I said, this may be the first two-parter.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, because
y'all want to
do you know what? I copied your list of films down onto this little thing here. So this is the first side, and it goes two sides, and we're just there on the
page
first
one
side. Yeah. So,
well, let's ask the chat. Are y'all enjoying this chronological order of Jerry Goldsmith, or should we just like skip some things?
Oh, I'm okay with coming back next week and doing the rest. I mean,
yeah.
I mean, who knows how
skip
long we're
stuff
going to talk
now.
about Poltergeist in a few minutes.
Oh.
Well, before that, he did another film. David says he's enjoying this. Good. We could have done John Williams. We would have been here for like 5 films. A little film called The Omen 3, which I think is my least favorite Omen, but I think it's Eric Wood's most favorite Omen.
Score-wise, yes.
Score-wise, yes.
This would... Yeah. It's up there as one of my all-time favorite Goldsmith scores. It's just so vastly different than the first two, but that's not the reason why I like it. It just has this absolute enormous gothic power to it that isn't necessarily in that Ave Satani style, but it just feels more
religious.
Yeah, and I think that's kind of it. The battle between good and evil is a little bit more defined here in this score, but there is just some absolute stunning cues, one after the other, and some of the most. I mean, yeah, anytime a composer goes into this religioso mode, and does it this well, that's I am not religious at all whatsoever, but when I hear cues the what's it called, the first coming, the second coming, what was that? It was the one in the middle.
The second coming.
Yeah.
Track number 7.
I need reference. Here it is. Okay. Yeah. So I remember hearing that for the very first time and just repeating that. But of course, you get the incredible action track, The Hunt. The main title is just a banger. That thing, again, I think one of the reasons why I like this one so much as well, and I'm really big on the recordings themselves. I would add an extra like star rating if I had to, just because it's so well recorded. The remastering job on this version compared to the original, I mean, the original didn't sound very good at all, but Eric Labson took Eric Tomlinson's recording, which was done at Abbey Road Studios in London. Eric Tomlinson in this period was recording some of the greatest scores ever composed, and he was doing some of his best work. There's a progression in Eric Tomlinson's sound throughout the 70s where it goes from that real tight mic stuff, as if you'd heard it in Star Wars, and then slowly begins to breathe. And you hear scores like Raiders of the Lost Ark and The Final Conflict and Monsignor, Return of the Jedi, all recorded by Eric Tomlinson in London. And this is the period where I think Tomlinson gets it right, where he's just able to capture the power of an orchestra almost as good as K.E. Wilkinson, who was recording stuff for the National Philharmonic Orchestra and Charles Gerhardt. This, I think, is one of Eric Tomlinson's finest recordings. And this expanded release finally let the score breathe. And so the horn writing, the chorus, I mean, that final cue is... Again, talking about a film that doesn't deserve its score, Goldsmith had to do so much musical and dramatic heavy lifting during that sequence. I mean, can you imagine as a composer just looking at that, and it's like there's supposed to be finally the big battle between good and evil at the end, and it just as you get started, it fades to black and goes to an end title, and you're like, oh my god. Or even the Second Coming, right? Isn't it just like a bunch of computer screens? And you're like, another composer would just look at that and write something flat, but Goldsmith, even on the crappiest of crappiest movies, knew that he had to do his best and help tell the story, or help elicit those emotions that you might not have yourself. And so if you had seen those scenes just naked without any music, you wouldn't feel anything. But then all of a sudden, when the music's incorporated, especially into this score, some of the crappiest stuff you see, even it's crap, but you're feeling something because of the music. And that's where Goldsmith went above and beyond, more so than any other composers. And this album, start to finish, is an absolute masterwork. And I just love that there's an evolution of the sound, where he's just not going back and regurgitating stuff from the first films. It's, what this reminds me of? It reminds me of what Alan Silvestri did with Back to the Future 3, where, Back to the Future 1 and Back to the Future 2, very similar, sharing cues, very much the same thing with, I think, with the Omen and Omen 2, right? They're very stylistically similar, but then when you get to 3, expansive, new themes, still seems to be part of those first two movies, but it's just something more. Love that stuff. I love it when composers do that sort of stuff. And again, Final Conflict, an absolute masterpiece.
Score what?
I was going to say exactly what Eric just said.
I have a question. Do you think Goldsmith ever watched the movie and he's like, "Damn, this is crap"?
Yeah,
I'm sure he did.
Absolutely.
Or do you think he was just like a little puppet dog? He's like, "Okay, I got it. I'm getting some themes. I'm gonna make this really good. This is gonna sound awesome. This is gonna be a big part right here. Yeah, I got this."
I think because he loved doing what he did, and he was so good at it, I think he must have got a film like The Final Conflict and thought, "Oh my God, what is this? I've got to really science the shit out of this," to coin a phrase, and he just goes that extra further, that extra bit further, just to try and make something out of it, try and redeem the film somehow. So that's why you get these such great scores for crappy films, I think.
Yeah, I think there's a point, and this goes back to a quote I heard from Alex North during the re-recording of his score to 2001 and 1993, where he had hoped that composers not only are writing for the film and enhancing the movie, but they're also writing for themselves. Like they are consciously aware that they're going to write good music no matter what. And I think Goldsmith was one of those, that even if it's a piece of crap, he's got a job that he can now, write great music. And I don't think he was the type of, what did he call Goldsmith fans, or fans who collected his stuff, like they were bottle cap collectors, and he didn't really appreciate them. But I think the fact that we have soundtrack albums where we're able to appreciate these scores from absolutely horrendous movies and just enjoy them as pure music, that's what I appreciate from composers who I hope are making a conscious choice that Alex North has suggested, where not only you're servicing the movie, but you're writing good music for yourself. Because I think that's, you could easily, I guess, as a film composer, and I'm not one, but you could easily just say, "Oh, I'm just going to do my job. I'm going to give the film, TV show, or video game just what it needs," without going that extra mile. And I think that if I was a composer, I would be like, "No, I'm gonna write the best thing I've ever written for every single project going forward, no matter how crappy this project might be." And maybe the music might help, but rarely does the music ever improve a movie, like a bad movie, but it definitely help enhance a good one. And you just kind of hope that maybe The Final Conflict would turn out to be a good movie, but yeah, you're just wondering what's going through the mind of these composers sometimes when they're handed this stuff. You know, it's like, it's dreadful. So what do you do? And I appreciate composers who do their best no matter what.
Didn't Goldsmith say, and I'm like paraphrasing, but a score can save a movie, but a movie can't save a score?
Sorry, say that again?
I'm paraphrasing hardly, but a score can save a movie, but a movie can't save a score.
Now, the quote that I was talking about, I mean, I actually just listened or watched that Max Steiner documentary, which I think is on HBO Max now, but you can actually find it on Vimeo, a legit version of it on Vimeo that was released by the filmmakers, and I can share that at some other time. And there was a quote saying that, yeah, a good score can help enhance a good movie, but a good score can't make a bad movie better or something. Again, I'm paraphrasing. It doesn't sound as as good as it did in the documentary. But I mean, I don't think there's a point where I've seen a crappy movie and gone, man, that movie's great now because of the music. I like the music, but the movie's still crap. Yeah. But that's just me. I don't know. I don't know if anybody else has experienced something different. I mean, it's really hard for the music to do that heavy lifting and make the story that's being told somewhat more enjoyable because of it. I don't know.
David wants to know. Oh, go ahead.
I was going to read out the same thing, so you go ahead.
Yeah, David wants to know if Eric Tomlinson is the same guy who helped develop THX.
No, that was Tomlinson Holman. He was a professor. Oh. So Eric Tomlinson is just the recording engineer. He was, he was used for almost everything in London. I know he recorded a bunch of Barry scores, John Barry Bond scores, but I mean, he really came to prominence recording Star Wars for John Williams, and then a lot of the LSO recordings that were done in the late 70s to early to mid 80s was Eric Tomlinson. And I think one of the last things he did was 12 Monkeys. But I think he had a hard time catching up with technology. Even I think James Horner was one that complained about trying to integrate electronics into whatever stage they were on, and Tomlinson was just kind of over his head. And the same thing happened, I think, with Supergirl. It's one of the last scores I think that Goldsmith ever recorded with Eric Tomlinson was Supergirl, and things were just messed up from there. And then he went on to Mike Ross Trevor and Bruce Botnick from that point. But Tomlinson, there's a great PDF online that recounts the history and what he did as a recording engineer. Chris Malone wrote it, who also wrote a great paper on the music of Star Wars. So if you can ever find it, I highly recommend you read it. I think if you just do a search for Eric Tomlinson and Chris Malone, you should be able to find this document. Actually, the first thing that comes up is our interview with Chris Malone on our podcast. But it's through Malone Digital. It's like Eric Tomlinson, recording engineer. And there's a great PDF, which actually, guys, I'm going to share in the private chat, and whoever's chatting on YouTube maybe can put it up there. If it's still available, it looks like it's still loading. Yeah. And if you go to Malone Digital, and you can find articles and analysis and commentary on other things as well. But yeah.
Anything y'all want to add for Omen 3, or should we move on to Poltergeist?
No, I just want to say it's my favorite of the 3 Omen scores, and I would put it up there in my top 5 of horror scores.
Okay, I'm just curious. What's the other 4?
Where is it now? I had them written down. Okay, in no particular order, my other 4 are Poltergeist. I went by your list here, so some of these might not be horror films. So I chose from your list so you could be involved. So Poltergeist, The Final Conflict, I've chosen The Ghost in the Darkness. It has some horror elements, but it's more of a kind of.
I have to say, getting eaten by lions in the savannah
Yeah, I
of
mean,
Africa would be pretty horrific.
I must admit, the only reason I've chosen it is because it was on your list, but I wouldn't have put that in a list of horror films. And just for quirkiness value, I've put The Burbs because that does have horror elements in it. But
it's a horror comedy for sure.
And I've got one that wasn't on your list, I don't think, but it does have, to me, horror elements. I put the 13th Warrior.
Yeah, someone made a comment about that earlier, and I was thinking that was to go on here, but what year did
Eric
that
would
come
probably
out?
disagree.
I think the book better explores the horror of the story than the film does, but I don't know whether that disqualifies it as a horror movie. I think the trailer itself set itself up to be kind of like that horror movie that it could have been. Vikings fighting these evil demons or whatever, and it just never turned out to be like that. And even the score, I mean, wow, Graham Revell's score kind of goes down that horror route more so than Goldsmith does. Goldsmith kind of presents it much like he did his score to The Mummy. So I never really, and I think I've only seen The 13th Warrior once. I saw it in the theater and didn't like it. I liked the idea, but I knew it was a mess of a film. And John McTiernan was basically ripped out of that production by Michael Crichton himself. So yeah, I'd kind of like to see what McTiernan's cut with Revell's score. Graham Revell's score would be an interesting one to get on CD. He uses bagpipes in the score.
Well, now I'm interested.
Because, and I talked to Tim Simonek about these. He's like, yeah, our score was very much different. And he goes, we even used bagpipes, like these authentic Viking bagpipes. And I'm like, what are you talking about? He goes, yeah, Vikings use bagpipes. And I'm like, oh, that's interesting. Which is why, when I listened to How to Train Your Dragon, when they introduced bagpipes, it just made complete sense to me. Vikings had bagpipes. Anyway, that's a whole other story. But yeah, a Graham Revell, Jerry Goldsmith twofer would be amazing. An amazing release. Because they're vastly different scores. Anyway, you have to continue with your list, Ian.
David says the past 10 minutes about the Omen evolution of scores is why he listens to the show. Well done, gentlemen. Well done. Thank you.
Thank you. I hope it made sense. I hope we all made some sort of sense.
Yeah.
What's the
anyway,
link?
That was my top 5. That was 5 scores.
Oh, okay.
Poltergeist, Final Conflict, 13th Warrior, Ghost in the Darkness, and The Burbs. From Birdman's list.
Well, what's your top 5?
What's my top 5?
Yeah.
Again, no particular order. The Omen 3, Poltergeist, Twilight Zone the movie, Alien, and Mephisto Waltz. But I would probably now put The Burbs in there as well. And then if you want to consider Gremlins 2 as a horror movie as well, I'll put that in there.
Okay.
I think Gremlins is more horror than Gremlins 2. But yeah, The Burbs, great choice. Can't miss out on that one. That is one of the best, like, just comedy scores I have ever heard. Incredible work. Again, incredible work that Goldsmith did with Joe Dante. What a team they were. I wish they had done more.
I have The Burbs. I have the LP that came out from Waxworks, but I do not have that CD because it's like over $100.
Yeah. And the original release was an also rarity. That was in the early days of the Perez Serban CD Club. And they only had like 30 minutes of score on there. So
it's also over $100.
Yeah. They're both big moneymakers right now.
Yeah.
So what are your top 5s, Daniel, or top 5?
Number 1 would be Mephisto Waltz. There's no competition there. Then I'd probably put the Omen trilogy at number 2.
Whoa.
Now, remember, it's
5.
Daniel's top 5.
Oh, yeah, sorry. Yeah, go on.
It will include about 60 scores.
I was really impressed with what he did for Psycho 2. I think
Oh, yeah.
to follow up Herman's score to Psycho, man, that I don't. That took some balls, and he did a fine job. So I'm at 3. I'd probably say Gremlins, Alien. Where am I at? Is that 5?
That's not going to stop you.
It's not.
And then I'd say Leviathan and Hollow Man, and I tap out.
Okay.
So my top 5 has 8,
8 in it. Yeah.
9, whatever. It's just numbers.
So
how are y'all on time? We're at Poltergeist.
I'm willing to talk about Poltergeist now and then call it a day and then continue. Or we can tease Poltergeist because we're going to talk about, I think, this for quite a long time.
Okay, we're talking about Poltergeist for a long time. I need to brush up because I wasn't that enamored with Poltergeist. So
when's the last time you watched it?
I've never watched it, but I listened to it the other day.
Wait, what movie are you doing this week on Wednesday?
War of the Worlds.
Oh my God, why aren't you doing Poltergeist?
Well, Boomer and I had it planned out, and then he's still living in a shelter. So Big Al and I are coming and doing our own thing for Halloween. And
will you watch Poltergeist from now until our next episode here?
I will, and we both have to listen. We all 3 have to listen to Reincarnation of Peter Proud.
Okay. I'm willing to put this show on hold so that you can experience Poltergeist, which is a freaking masterpiece.
Okay.
And then we can discuss it in full because I think it's, man, everything about this movie is pitch perfect. And I think you need to watch it, and I think you need context in order to talk about the music.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Well, real quick question: what is the definitive release for Poltergeist?
Oh,
the FSM one. That one.
It is. But if you have the Rhino Records one, I
think that's the one I have.
You then have a very good presentation of it, and it sounds incredible. Yeah. It's expanded from the original LP, but the FSM did everything. But you'll still get everything, all the major highlights on that Rhino Records version. It's got great notes too, and but it's such an important score. I mean, 1982 was such an important year for film music, and some can even make an argument that Poltergeist probably should have won the Academy Award over E.T. I'm not one of them, but I can understand the arguments because, my God, those 2 scores, you put them up against each other. One day it's like I would love Poltergeist, and then I like E.T. They're vastly different scores, but they're both masterful. But I mean, Poltergeist, it's Goldsmith working directly with Steven Spielberg. Just think about that for a moment. There weren't many times where, Spielberg is working with anybody else other than John Williams, but Spielberg took over post-production and worked directly with Jerry Goldsmith. This is almost like a Goldsmith-Spielberg collaboration, and the results are absolutely incredible.
Masterful.
Yeah.
Looking in the future here, David Pensack says he was working for Universal at the time The Burbs was released, and it was a profit issue. It wasn't worth the investment to release the soundtrack.
Yeah, I don't think that the film didn't do very well, which is too bad. But it's an odd duck. It's such a strange movie, but it's such a perfect movie. I think it's one of Tom Hanks's greatest performances, at least comedic performances. I think he's absolutely in his element in this movie. But there's just so many, like Dante even is just, this is a pure Dante movie. It's just so different, so very different. It's scary, it's funny, it's satirical, it's everything. I love it. And then of course, Goldsmith picks up on that and just writes one of his career best scores for it. And it's just too bad that movie tanked. And but it's not for everybody. That's the thing. It isn't. But I love it. And the thing is, I only grew to love it. I saw it as a kid. I'm like, that was entertaining, but it was like, it really wasn't my thing. But then, as I got older, I understood it. Much like my appreciation for Gremlins 2 and for what it was. I liked Gremlins 2 when I saw it in the theater the first time. It was just gut-bustingly hilarious. But then once you get into, again, the context and its making and why it was made and everything that was thrown into it. I mean, it's a movie that basically shouldn't have been made, but Spielberg just went, here, make it, go, do what you want, Dante. And again, it's a pure Joe Dante movie. I love it. I love that they just let him go and do his own thing. That's what I love about the art of movie making. When you have as little outside interference as possible, and that's when you get wacky movies like this and The Burbs and other various examples where you just know an auteur is at work, and that's his vision. And they did it on a major motion picture. I mean, that's what's so crazy about it. But anyway, Anyway, back to Poltergeist. You're watch it late at night. That's when the first time I ever saw it. Scared the pants off of me. And still to this day, everything in that movie holds up. Everything. I don't think there's an off frame. The script is so strong. It's so tight. The characters are so well written. Everything is so perfectly done. Perfectly done. It's not only a great horror movie, it's just a great film. Great movie.
There was talk earlier this year when they were talking that it might be released on 4K, and people on Facebook were saying, the visual effects won't stand up under that kind of scrutiny. But I can tell you, it looks absolutely awesome in 4K.
I think one thing you should do is watch after this. Have you seen the ILM documentary on Disney Plus?
I have.
So when they go into the details about the special effects, the Poltergeist, the last big effect in this film will blow your mind, knowing that was done for real, and how they engineered it.
Well, I actually read about that in that ILM book. So I kind of, but it was great to actually see the guys talking about
what ILM book is this, Ian?
But I mean, again, it's a masterclass in practical effects, and lighting, cinematography. It's, I mean, and you're going to see so many things in this movie. As much as it's directed by Tobe Hooper, and that's the credit, there's so much Spielberg in it. So many distinct Spielberg shots. So that one dolly zoom down the hallway, it's such an impressive effect. That's all done in camera. You are going to be. I think you're going to be amazed. I don't like to, overhype these things, but Poltergeist is a classic for a reason.
Are you sure Spielberg did not direct Poltergeist? Because there was rumors.
I'm pretty sure he was there on set every single day. The credits for Hooper, no doubt. Spielberg was there every day making suggestions, and I mean, he wrote The Thing. It's his movie. It's a Spielberg movie that somebody else was kind of overseeing, I would say, and like on set was babysitting it for him.
he was like under contract at the time, saying he couldn't direct anything else because he was supposed to work on ET or something.
I think that was it. Yeah, and they were coming up back to back. I mean, think about it. That's they came out like a weekend apart.
Something like that, yeah.
Just like I said, 82. What an incredible year for film scores, and the fact that Spielberg could work with John Williams and Jerry Goldsmith at the exact same time, man. But yeah, go see it right away. It's so much goodness, goodness.
So next week we're discussing Poltergeist, and then the following week we will come back to finish out Jerry Goldsmith.
I mean, I've said my piece here for some of it, but I mean, yeah, once we get into the music, I mean, we'll talk about it. But I think there's a lot to talk about on this film. But I mean, we also got I mean, we could talk about how underrated Psycho 2 is. When we go to the horrors of Twilight Zone the movie,
I mean, Twilight Zone the movie. It's like 3 or 4 different scores in one film.
Yeah.
That each segment is so different. So there's a lot to talk about with that one as well.
Yeah.
So.
And there's some pretty solid later scores as well that enter in that horror genre. So, but I think we'll be talking a lot about that kind of late to mid 80s output more so than anything else.
Yeah.
But it should be fun. And then eventually we'll get to John Barry. That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
and by the way, speaking of Gremlins 2, if you ever get to see that Key and Peele skit about how they came up with all the ideas for Gremlins 2, it's hilarious. And I think Joe Dante even recently talked about that particular skit, and he said, yeah, that was pretty much how it came about. It is freaking hilarious. Watch it. Key and Peele, Gremlins 2, search that up on YouTube. It's great. It's great.
Ian, you got anything coming up this week?
I have no idea, to tell you the truth. But
Okay.
there'll be something dropping at the weekend. Don't know what it is yet, though.
Okay.
I want to say one thing, though, Ian. Masterful job on that Blade Runner review. I hope you do more. I think the 15-minute time span was perfect. I love hearing your personal stories, seeing the movies and seeing the albums, and I love that kind of deep dive that doesn't go like into everything for like 30, 40, 50 minutes. And I think it was perfect. I'd love to see more of you doing that. It was so great. And everything you said was spot on.
Well, I appreciate you saying that. Thank you very much, Eric.
Love it.
Eric, what you got coming up this week?
I'm trying to get back into the swing of things because I've been off for about 4 weeks, just battling with a whole bunch of things, illnesses, and just way too much work. Not enough time to just enjoy myself and do things just, for the fun of it. So, but I will be releasing the new logo for Cinematic Sound Radio at some time, so that'll be all part of our merchandise and things like that. But I'm excited I really like the new logo. It finally you finally look at it and you kind of understand what the podcast is about without having to kind of this doesn't really mean anything. But that's going to be exciting. And then one other thing, and I'm not sure whether you've heard about it, and please allow me to help promote a friend's Kickstarter, and it has everything to do with film music. My friend Jay Blake Fischera, who runs Scored to Death Radio on Cinematic Sound Radio, and he's written those 2 great Scored to Death books. He has till the end of this month to reach a ridiculous goal on his Kickstarter in order to do something called Scored to Death, The Dark Art of Scary Movie Music. And he's interviewing horror music composers, and he's done a bunch already, and there's a teaser trailer which shows all the people that he's talked to already. He's having a tough time getting the funds to make this project happen.
How
And
much
he's doing
do you
it. He needs about $55,000.
Oh.
But like the goal is actually $40,000 American. I'm only seeing the Canadian right now. He had about 17,000 Canadian, and his goal is $55,000. 100 people have backed him so far, but there's a lot of cool perks, like a newly recorded album from all the composers that he has interviewed, and free Blu-rays and DVDs and free versions of his books. If you get on this Kickstarter, you can see all the behind-the-scenes stuff that he's done. But there aren't too many film music documentaries out there, especially done by experts, but guys who know exactly what they're talking about. Not guys and gals, but it's like one was the Max Steiner documentary that I saw the other day, and it's on Vimeo. But Jay Blake Fischera is one of the leading experts in horror music, and you could tell just by the books that he has released. I hope that people go out there and support him And even if doesn't get backed, there's got to be a way that we can take that money that we've, put to the Kickstarter and maybe give to him through a donation or something. But he's having a real tough time getting people involved. So if you can, even if it's just a couple of bucks, just throw something his way so we can get this done. And I'm not part of it. I'm just saying, so at least we can see this because it just looks so great. And but yeah, so just look for Scored to Death movie on Kickstarter. It's also on my website. And you can find a link there. I can even put a link in if you want to take it through the private chat. I don't know how, I still can't access the YouTube account and maybe put it in there, but I hope you don't mind, Daniel.
No, that's like,
again,
we should like have like a little announcement show about that.
Yeah. If we could talk about it as many times as possible, I would love.
Yeah.
I don't think he's going to meet his goal, but I don't know what we could do in the future in order to make sure that this thing happens. But if there's anybody out there that's going to do a horror movie music documentary, it's Jay Blake Fischera. And that's all I have to say.
And for all those people interested, I'll put a link in the comments to that Jerry Goldsmith.
Thank you. That's what I was trying to do.
Concert.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to that. I might listen to that tonight.
Well, I've got some stuff showing up in the mail from various record people. And War of the Worlds Wednesday night with Big Al. As I mentioned, Boomer is still living in a shelter, but life is trying to get back to normal. His house does not have to be demolished, but it does have to be completely gutted and redone all inside. And he did lose a lot of stuff in the flooding, but his family's safe. He's safe.
Is there a GoFundMe for him or anything like that?
There's not. I don't know if he would have. I think he might feel bad about that, but I will check.
All right.
I
wish him all the best. I don't wish that on anybody.
Yeah.
And I'm sorry that happened.
He said all the street signs in his neighborhood are just like, flat.
My God.
And, they had to like rip out everything in the house and just put it on the side of the road because it's just, it gets flooded if you can't do anything with it. And stuff's just sitting there because everything's so backed up. And he said people would just come by and just dig through the rubble on the side of the road and just like, I'm like, what are you doing? It's all ruined. I'm like, don't you know that? And it's just like, wow. I understand someone puts like a washing machine on the side of the road. You think, wow, I can fix that up and use it in my house. I'm like, that's cool if you can do that. But after like a natural disaster like that, I wouldn't even begin to do something like that. That's just, anyways.
Well, yeah. I mean, I don't know if you can mention to him, but if there's anything that we can do to help, I'm trying. I think we're trying to be helpful instead of like pitying him if we send him something. But I mean, have your house completely gutted. I mean, there's got to be some way we can help him get back on his feet.
Yeah, I think insurance is kicking in for everything.
Oh,
and
good.
That's good.
Okay.
That's good. But I don't talk too much because it's still being able to keep your phone charged and everything else. I can only imagine how busy his day is. Jeez. So I don't want to pester him. But he did sound pretty positive on his show last night. But do keep him in your thoughts because I can't imagine.
Yeah,
all that.
Yeah.
Just
Definitely.
Agreed.
But next week we'll start out with Poltergeist and see how much further we get from there.
I'm excited to hear your thoughts on the movie. I think I'm so excited, more so than anything else. I just love it when I get to hear stories from someone who hasn't seen a movie that I've loved for decades. So I'm interested. Even if you hate it, I'm interested in what your thoughts are.
Okay.
I don't think you're going to hate it. It's a tough movie to hate.
I don't think I'll hate it. I've been interested in seeing it, and they had it in the theater last month, or maybe it's this month, and maybe I haven't missed it yet. And I was like, I need to go see that in the theater. And then you get busy doing other things, and it just falls off the radar. Thank you, David, for coming by and contributing as always. Thank you, everyone who comes by and comments and participates in the chat. We love all of you and appreciate all of you. But adopt, don't shop, keep listening to great film scores. Come back Wednesday night for War of the Worlds with Big Al and I. And next Monday, Poltergeist. And we will keep going down the list of Jerry Goldsmith's horror scores. Take care of them.